Good evening and welcome to the 2016 Wayzata Public Schools Legislative Action Committee Candidate Forum. I am Esther Dale, Citizen Chair of the Wayzata LAC. We are so pleased that you could join us for this event. So before we begin, let me just describe the format. To start, we'll give each candidate an opportunity to answer 2 questions right here in the auditorium. Then we will ask the candidates to move to breakout classrooms that are organized by Senate districts. We encourage the audience to go to the classroom of your Senate district so that you can directly interact with the candidates for whom you'll be voting. If you don't know which Senate district you live in, we'll have legislative maps in the auditorium entryway. A member of our LAC will facilitate the discussions in the small groups. To begin, the facilitator will ask each of the candidates 2 prepared questions. Following the initial questions, the facilitator will open up the discussion to audience questions. There will be an LAC member in each breakout room collecting questions. Note cards are available in the auditorium entry and in each breakout room. For all questions, each candidate will have 1 minute, 30 seconds to respond. Our timekeepers will hold up a yellow card when there are 15 seconds left and a red card with time when time has expired. As our time is limited, we ask the community members to please refrain from applauding during the forum. Finally, please remember that all questions must focus on education, and all candidates will have an opportunity to respond. We are recording tonight's forum in its entirety to be replayed on EdTV and on the Wayzata Public School website. Audience members also have the right to record tonight's forum. We ask all audience members to join the LAC in a collective commitment to successful public education for our children. We request the priorities of the evening include respectful and thoughtful questions that clarify different perspectives and reveal common ground for the good of our community students. Let's get started. Okay. All right, our first question of night is this. As an introduction, please describe your interest and qualifications to serve in the legislature, and what do you see as the most critical issue facing public schools in Minnesota? So each candidate will have 1 minute, 30 seconds to respond, and we will begin with Senate District 33. So Jay Nygaard.
Hi, I'm Jay Nygaard. Many of you may know me from my turban battles I've had with the city of Orono trying to go green and basically protect everybody's right to go green in this state. I grew up in Orono, Long Lake, went to Orono my entire career. Then other than serving in the U.S. Navy as a nuclear power machinist mate and getting my mechanical engineering degree at the University of Minnesota, I moved back out to Lake Minnetonka area to kind of live in my dream home with my family. I have 2 kids, 3 cats and a dog. I didn't bring foo-foo tonight, I usually do. As far as my qualifications, I've served on the City Council and Planning Commission. I understand how government works. A long-time community volunteer with Meals on Wheels. And I taught at West Tonka some advanced math and renewable energies, and I do give presentations. I mean, I grew up, I rode the carousel in Lake Minnetonka. I've done a lot of different things, or carousel at Excelsior back when the amusement park was there. I've done a lot of different things and grown up with Lake Minnetonka over the years, and I know what the area is like, and I know what the people want because I am one of the people. That's who I am. I'm one of you. I've been here all my life, and I just can't wait for the opportunity to get to the state level and help make some honest changes to prevent things like what happened to me, going to jail for a buried chunk of concrete in my yard, and my wife and I sentenced to 6 months in jail. Doesn't happen to other people because we have better things to do with our prisons and jails than throw people in for silly things like that. As far as what's really important to me when it comes, it's the big drug epidemic going on in these schools, and we can talk more about that later.
Thank you. Sherry Pugh.
Good evening. My name is Sherry Pugh, and I'm running for Senate in SD 33. My qualifications: I'm a graduate of Mound High School, class of 1969, and we have two generations in that high school system, which is now called West Tonka. But more than that, between my aunts and cousins, there are about 20 educators, 4 principals, and a number of PhDs, all in education. So I grew up in a family where education was a must. We grew up in a family where you didn't talk about not going to college. Now, not everyone always made it, but at least you were told that that was to be your vision. My qualifications are also that I've worked in community building and for 35 years, so I've worked on comprehensive community building efforts which look at the whole of a community. And one of the things that's always been central, whether I was working in rural Minnesota or rural South in the Mississippi Delta, is that a community school is the heart of a community, and it's the most important institution in a community that makes it healthy. But I do want to say that Jay has raised an issue that's sort of the unspoken conversation, and that is the issue with drugs in our schools. And so I'm one of those people who knows how to bring people together to have those unprecedented conversations and deal with the issues.
Thank you. Next will be the candidates from House District 33A. Jerry Hertas.
Well, thank you, and thank you everybody for attending this evening. Thank you for putting on the forum. I was elected to be your state representative in 2012. I'm the sitting representative at this time, and I'd like to continue serving your interests in St. Paul, continuing to be a conservative voice there. I'd like to make sure that we continue to scrutinize how we spend our money. Want to make sure that there's some cost benefit with the programs that we have, to scrutinize them and to make sure that we support the ones that are really working and start to phase out or sunset those that do not. With regard to my qualifications, I've been 40 years in the private sector. I've had a very diverse career and background. I've had a number of careers and occupations. I started out in the healthcare industry. I was going to go into anesthesia, become a nurse anesthetist. I obtained my nursing degree from St. Mary's. While I was a married college student, started a family, I was also working in the trades and construction as a self-funding college student. And I kept my nursing license and worked in that field for a period of time, but also I continued to work in the construction trades, which finally led to really building a career in real estate development and custom home building, as well as real estate brokerage, which I continue to do today. As far as what is the most critical issue facing our public schools, I think, first of all, we're pretty blessed out here in the west side of the metro to have some really good schools, and probably most important, we know that education begins at home with the parents, and we have parent involvement in our school districts. And I would like to just point out that one of the challenges we have facing our school districts today is an aging population. Baby boomers are retiring, their incomes are going down, they want to stay in their homes, and we've got some real funding challenges in terms of getting the type of support from the community to continue expanding and growing the revenue that is necessary to have an educated society, to teach our children to not only become self-sufficient, but also to know good governance in Minnesota. Thank you.
Thank you. Noelle Thomas, please.
Hello, I'm Noelle Thomas. I'm running for the Minnesota House in District 33A, and I'm DFL endorsed. First of all, I love school. Been in school a long time. I have a master's, a PhD, and I'm a pharmacist, all from the University of Minnesota. I've spent the last 40 years working in pharmacy, creating businesses, and creating leadership opportunities for my profession. I'm excited to serve. I'm excited to listen to what everyone, the experts here in the audience and the experts here in Wayzata School District feel are important issues, and to be a champion for you, because education has meant so much to me and to my family. What do I think the big issues are? I'm also a grandmother now. The achievement gap is crucial. It's crucial not only for the schools, but for our communities. I think there's a lot of innovation. There's innovation here in Wayzata that needs to be championed. So I look forward to serving you. I believe in local control. As Jerry said, we are really blessed to have such a great school system here, and I hope to help you continue that grand tradition. Thank you.
Thank you. Next will be our candidate from Senate District 34.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the Wayzata LAC for putting this on. We don't get too many campaign forums, and so it's good to meet citizens in this type of setting and get into some real detail on answers and questions. I think when we talk about the interest, what is my interest and qualifications, my number one interest is I'm a dad, and I'm also a product of public education. And I want the very best education for my kids because I want them to be very successful in their adult life. And what we do in the very beginning phases of education is going to start setting that path for them. And it's not just my kids, it's your kids as well. A good education not only provides a good income, but it also provides good citizens. And we want to make sure that they're responsible, that they're learned in how to affect their life. How they affect the legislature is something that I've begun to question whether or not we teach enough of in our public schools. But nevertheless, all of these things are important. Some of the comments that have been said about what are the challenges coming to our school system across the state, part of it is equalized funding. Some school districts get a tremendous amount of money per student and others do not, especially in our western suburbs. The other one is I want to keep our kids safe while they are in school, and the pressure of drugs and other criminal activities is a threat in our schools. And of course, the economy is always improved when we have good education and employers that have a ready source of good stock to pick from as far as potential employees that are ready to work on an intellectual scale.
Thank you so much. Next will be our candidate from House District 34B.
Good evening. I'm Dennis Smith, a state representative from Maple Grove, District 34B, and there's a portion of Maple Grove that is part of this school district. It's a privilege to be with you this evening, and I'd like to thank the Wayzata Legislative Action Committee for hosting this event and having this opportunity for us to have this discussion. I feel I'm qualified to be serving in the legislature because I am a father and a member of the community. I have a great interest in having the best children graduate from our high schools, have the best product. I'm a business owner, and I have been for almost 20 years. I'm a practicing attorney in Maple Grove as well. And I think the biggest challenge that I've seen when I've been talking to local business owners and the different educational facilities throughout the Maple Grove and the surrounding area is that we need to have an environment where our children can excel in school. And that means different things to different children, and it means different things to different schools and different school districts. That means we need to provide an environment where there's flexibility, where there's appropriate funding, and then flexibility for the school districts that know their area the best to be able to provide the best products so our children can be successful, however that is defined for them. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next will be our candidates from Senate District 44.
Good evening. My name is Paul Anderson, and first I want to say thank you to the Wayzata LAC, and also congratulations to the Wayzata School District on Birchview being named a Blue Ribbon School yesterday. It was the Wayzata schools with incredible teachers and coaches that provided me and helped me build a passion for service and leadership in this community. This is personal to me. This is something that I really built through these halls here. I went to Widston Elementary School, which doesn't exist anymore. Went to Wayzata East, and then through these halls when it was then the Wayzata High School. It's personal. My girls are now will graduate from the Wayzata High School in just a few years. The passion for making sure that we have a continued strong public education system in Minnesota is very important. We have a tremendous school district here. We have 4 other strong, incredible school districts within Senate District 44, and I want to go and be a champion for that. For me, my experience both as a small business owner and executive positions in government, in nonprofit sectors, and in business has prepared me for this. And for me, the most critical issue I believe that we're facing is both stability in funding and unfunded mandates.
Thank you. Deb Calvert.
Thank you so much for this tremendous opportunity to talk about our wonderful West Metro Public Schools. I'm Deb Calvert. I'm running to represent Minnetonka, Plymouth, and Woodland in Senate District 44. And I moved here 13 years ago in part because the schools in the West Metro are so wonderful, and they provided tremendous opportunities for my children who went to school in the Hopkins public school system and graduated from Hopkins High School. And I actually got my start in politics here in Minnesota on the Hopkins Legislative Action Coalition, and I worked very closely with the other West Metro Legislative Action Coalitions, including Wayzata, Case in Minnetonka, St. Louis Park, and that's because I have a passion for public schools. I believe it's the cornerstone of our democracy, and I come from a family of educators. I'm a Suzuki violin teacher myself by training, and I was president of a statewide music teachers organization. I'm on the Minnetonka Planning Commission, and I was the executive assistant to the president and dean of Mitchell Hamlin School of Law, formerly William Mitchell, where I learned a great deal about nonpartisan problem solving as we solved the problems in the legal education market. And I was tremendously inspired to see people put aside their differences and work together to solve some difficult problems. To me, the achievement gap is the most critical thing facing schools, and I know that there's a 0.5 return on investment for GDP, a GDP increase of 0.5% if we invest in our early childhood education.
All right, thank you. Next will be our candidates from House District 44A. Sarah Anderson.
Thank you, Esther. I'm State Representative Sarah Anderson. I represent the area of Plymouth, and my focus at the legislature has been on education and making sure that we have good quality schools. Because when we have good quality schools, we have a good, strong economy, and we want to make sure that we can grow as many jobs here and keep the talent that our schools produce in the state of Minnesota and not lose them to other states. On top of that, my focus has also been on making sure that we use your resources that you provide to us wisely. So those are kind of the 3 tenets that I focused on at the legislature. Just a little bit about my personal background. I've been married for 20 years to my husband, Paul, and he is a physics teacher. And so every day he comes home and he gives me a lot of feedback about what we need to do in schools. But beyond him being an interest for me when it comes to education policy is also the fact that I have a son who's a 3rd grader and attends Kimberly Lane Elementary. And I want to make sure that he has the best education, just like every parent here in the Wayzata School District does. So this is an issue near and dear to my heart. When it comes to the most challenging issue that I think that schools are facing, I'm going to agree with a couple of folks that had mentioned some items. Ms. Thomas, Ms. Calvert had mentioned the achievement gap being a huge thing, and I've carried legislation to expand and increase early childhood education funding for at-risk youth. The more that we can do in that sector, the more prepared that they'll be for kindergarten and the better academic success those students will have. So I've put a lot of time and emphasis on that at the legislature, as well as some other issues that we'll get into later. So,
Thank you. Ginny Cleveland.
Good evening. It's an honor to be here. My children all graduated from Wayzata schools I'm probably the only candidate sitting up here who actively researched schools from another country to decide where I would move my family. In 2002, we were facing a move, and so I looked on the internet and Google said, Wayzata is it. I've never been dissatisfied. I want to say Wayzata is an excellent school district. There are many things that we do well here, and we should take pride in those accomplishments. We have some of the highest ACT scores in the nation. We have high math and reading proficiency, but the work is not yet done. For me, to see my children graduate from these schools and to be prepared for college and to not need any additional remediation is a job well done for our teachers and for our administrators. My reason for running is simple. We need stable and flexible funding for our school districts. 2003 should not be the benchmark for education in 2017.
Thank you. Next will be our candidates from House District 44B. John Applebaum.
Thank you. I'm John Applebaum, the state representative for District 44B, which includes Plymouth, Minnetonka, and the entire city of Woodland. Since the last time I was here 2 years ago, I have a couple exciting changes in my life. I got married, and my wonderful wife, Kate, is in the audience tonight, and believe it or not, the experience of marrying me has been so wonderful that she decided to open her very own bridal boutique to share that wonderful joy with other brides. It's called Annika Bridal Boutique. It's at 50th in France, and be sure to check it out. As far as the most critical issue facing education, I believe that ensuring our children have the opportunity to be successful in a globally competitive economy encapsulates all of our challenges when it comes to education. That means providing the resources necessary for schools to deliver a world-class education at all levels. So it begins at the pre-K stage and expanding access to affordable childcare and pre-K programs for our youngest learners. Then make sure that we have K-12 programs that are counting on and receive consistent, flexible, and sustainable funds that will lead to the best learning environments, meaning smaller class sizes, smaller student-teacher ratios, more wraparound services like counselors, etc. And finally, our K-12 program must prepare our children to be successful in a 21st century economy, and that means we have to make sure they're ready for college or the workforce in a way that they can afford. That means keeping college costs down, and I'm excited to tell you all about my efforts in that space. But I see a stop sign. Thank you for having me. Thanks for being here, and I look forward to the discussion tonight.
Thank you. Patti Meyer.
I'm Patti Meyer, and I'm running for the Minnesota House in 44B. As an introduction, I'm doing this because I think Minnesota is a great state, but it's facing many, many challenges. And I think we need people in St. Paul that fresh eyes, good listeners, people who can solve problems and get things done. My background is in the risk management, insurance, financial service industry, and I think some of those traits can help in St. Paul. We have many challenges, and education, of course, is one of the largest. And I think we need to do whatever we can in this state to make sure our children are educated and that they can compete, not only within the school, the state, the country, but on a global basis, because children right from this school are going to be out there looking for work and competing with children from around the world. I care very much about the prosperity of Minnesota, and I would like to see, as others have mentioned, the achievement gap narrow. But I also think we need to come up with ways to make children productive after school. Not all children are geared for college. Some children need to maybe explore the vocational area and some trades. And I know businesses would like to have interns and apprentices And I think that's something we seriously should look at and maybe spend a little more time on it, preparing the students not only for college, but the workforce. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, our candidate will be from 46A, Ann Taylor.
Hi, I'm Ann Taylor, representing 46A, which is Plymouth, Medicine Lake, Golden Valley, and St. Louis Park. It's an honor to be here at this forum tonight, which ultimately is very important, and it's about our children. Many life experiences have brought me to the point in running for office, education being primary. I have a 27-year-old stepson. I have a 16-year-old in high school, as well as a 4-year-old. So the experiences I bring as a parent is in private as well as public education, giving an active parent perspective. While I'm a mom, I also have prior experience in education, as that's my background, community-based programming, including working for Interfaith Outreach and Community Partners through their AmeriCorps Vista program in partnership with the Minnesota Literacy Council. I've also been a board member for MAC, formerly Minnesotans Against Common Core. We recently changed our name to Minnesota Advocates and Champions for Children. Through that process in the last few years, especially this year with bipartisan support, was able to enact and pass a bill, statute number 121A-065, and that's regarding the protection of student data, specifically with surveys that are being given to students without parent consent through third-party companies and websites as well. I have firsthand knowledge of what it's like to work with schools, teachers, the school boards, as well as our legislators. I have an interest specifically in closing that achievement gap. We need 100% graduation. Teen suicide, as well as prescription drug abuse and overuse is a huge concern as well. As evidenced in the past experiences, I hope to be able to work with more people and let our communities thrive through these experiences that I can bring forth. Thank you.
Thank you. Last will be our candidate from Sen District 46, Ron Latz.
Thank you and good evening. I'm Ron Latz. I'm the state senator. I represent St. Louis Park, Hopkins, Medicine Lake, Golden Valley, and a quarter of Plymouth, which is the Wayzata School District part of it. I've got 3 kids, all 3 in K-12 public schools right now in the western suburbs. I've served in the legislature for 4 years in the House, where I was on the Education Policy Committee and the Higher Education Committee, and then in the Senate for now 10 years, where I served on the Higher Education Committee. Presently, I chair the Senate Judiciary Committee. And I'm a lawyer by training, so I've got college and postgraduate training and education as well. I think there are a lot of issues facing our public schools right now. Fortunately, we're doing pretty well in the western suburbs. Achievement gap is certainly a broader issue of concern, but I think probably an overarching concern is funding stability, so that our schools can plan and can focus their resources on their district's needs. When I entered the legislature, we were lurching from deficit to deficit, scrambling to make a balanced budget. And in the end, funding stability for our public schools depends on funding stability for our state budget overall. In 2013, we were able to put into place the long-term structural stability, creating new revenues that gave us a long-term plan where we don't have to swipe from one-time funds anymore. And critically important, I think, for school funding long-term is to maintain that long-term funding stability for the state budget.
All right. Thank you for your responses. Now to the second question. At the core of every education forum is the issue of funding. Do you believe current funding levels are adequate or inadequate, and why? What changes would you propose to bring adequacy, stability, and predictability to funding for Minnesota public schools? We'll begin with House District 44A, Sarah Anderson.
Thank you. So in the 2015-2016 legislative session, we dedicated an increase of $605 million on the per pupil funding formula, a $605 million increase. That is the largest increase that we've had in the last 10 years for education funding. And it was done with bipartisan support in both the House, the Senate, and the governor signing it into law. As part of that, we also had an increase in the early childhood education funding of $48 million. And we also had school readiness funding and Head Start funding and increases on even college readiness funding of about $4 million there. So we had some great progress made in making sure that our schools have the tools that they need to educate our students. I was a proud supporter of that, and one of the huge advocates, as Representative Loon called me, she's the chair of the K-12 Education Finance Committee. She refers to me as the Tiger Mom advocate for school funding, especially out in the Western metro area. So proud to wear that moniker and support our schools in this area. That's been my focus. I think that we need to make sure that when we're looking at education funding, I know that special education funding is a huge concern for the Wayzata School District and what that means for you. And so we need to do a better job when it comes to special education funding, and also try and get the federal government to do a better job when it comes to special education funding. We share in that responsibility. So I'd like to see us do a couple of things in the last education bill. We did reduce the special education paperwork by 50%, and I guess I'll talk more about that later on.
Okay, thank you. Ginny Cleveland.
Thank you. As I stated earlier, one of the reasons, my primary reason for running for office is education funding. The facts don't always represent the truth. So in our district, I often hear my representatives speak about education funding as a priority. But what I would like for the people in this room to truly understand is that the truth is that the House proposed $158 million for K-12 spending. The governor requested a much higher number, and the compromise, fortunately for our school districts, was at $526 million. The other piece of this equation is Health and Human Services, which cannot be left out of school funding equations. Many of the partnerships that are involved in funding education also rely on partnerships with Health and Human Services. The proposal from the House was to cut $1.3 billion from Health and Human Services, which would devastate many of the mental health issues, mental health funding programs that we have and are used in our schools, and the partnerships which help our early learners before they enter school. So for that reason alone, I'm running for office.
Okay, next will be our candidates from House District 44B, John Applebaum.
Thanks. I believe that current funding levels are inadequate. First of all, it's inexcusable that we do not continue to adjust our funding for inflation. So even if we go up less than 1%, which the Republicans originally proposed, you're losing to inflation. What ultimately came to be was a 2% increase on the formula, which still, in effect, loses to inflation. So regardless of how anyone is going to say they voted or how they would vote up here, the fact of the matter is that our education funding is woefully inadequate. In my first term, I had a real awakening in how certain people feel about education. Again, you're going to hear a lot of nice talk up here, but actions speak louder than words. You heard Ginny mention $156 million towards education was the original proposal, and the Republicans heard from around the state superintendents saying that's going to result in layoffs. In fact, in Wayzata, it would have resulted in $3.2 million shortfall and 25 layoffs of teachers and staff members. Thankfully, colleagues of mine and I authored a bill for $800 million of additional funding. Ultimately, as you heard from Ginny, the compromise was at 525, 526 number, including $5 million, roughly $5 million for Wayzata schools, but it still puts Wayzata at a $600,000 shortfall. So regardless of any world record amounts that you'll hear increase, number one, it should have been higher, and number two, it's still not good enough. So you can count on schools actually getting what they need if reelected. Thank you.
Thank you. Patti Meyer.
Thank you. Thank you. Since I'm new to this process, every day you learn something more and more and more about the state and how it operates and the needs of the state of Minnesota. And doing a couple of these forums, I've realized that the funding issue is so very critical to the functioning of the schools and our education system in Minnesota. I think it should be, we should have equality and stability in the funding. And right now, when you look at our general fund, I think is, I don't know, $44 billion, and 40% of that goes to education. That's a lot of money that we're putting into education, and it seems like we need more. So maybe we need to drill down a little and see how we can spend that money to help the schools to achieve what we need to get accomplished, to have successful graduation rates, to prepare our kids to have the best possible education system out there. Some of these unfunded mandates, especially special ed, we need to get our arms around that because these kids need our help. And also right now the per pupil funding seems to be the formula, and maybe the formula needs to get changed. Maybe that's a project for the next session, is to look at that and see, is there a better way to do this?
Right. Thank you. Next will be our candidates from Senate District 44. Paul Anderson.
Well, we certainly need to adequately fund our schools. As Patti just alluded to, the education funding formula is just an absolute, it's complicated. It's said that only a handful of people, maybe 5, 6 people in the whole state truly understand the formula. We've got one-time funding that has been a resolution here these last couple of years. We got categorical ads. We need to really take a look at that, and I would really push for a nonpartisan commission that would really study this. It's been done in the past, but it's been done many years ago in a nonpartisan way, and it really things weren't adopted. So I'd really look to trying to figure out the root of this problem on the funding formula. And then with regards to reducing those mandates, those unfunded mandates, I would be a champion for continuing to push to remove those unfunded mandates.
Thank you. Deb Calvert, please.
I believe that to fully fund our public schools, we do need to increase our per pupil funding on the formula, because it does give individual school districts the flexibility to spend that money as they see fit to meet the needs of their individual school districts, which differ from school district to school district. But just taking the unfunded special ed mandate, here the cross subsidy is $9.2 million in Wayzata, and that translates to 184 teachers at $50,000 a year salaries. So part of what we need to do is to converse with our federal legislators and make sure that they are starting to meet their obligation. Federal government is supposed to pay 40% of the mandate, but they only pay around 17 or 18%, and it's projected that this year they're going to only pay 12.8%. So we have to work with our federal legislators. As a state, we have to start meeting our own obligations to special ed, because it does make more productive and self-sufficient citizens, which costs us fewer tax dollars later. And the other thing I think we can do is to continue to contribute to the rainy day fund for those lean times when our tax revenue goes down. We should still be able to provide tax revenue for our school districts at a stable level. Thank you.
Thank you. Next will be the candidate from House District 46A, Ann Taylor.
I feel the current funding is largely inadequate, especially that among special ed students. And this funding should really be for all the students, but the special ed students, I think, are hurt the most. In looking at the at the formula, I think it would be helpful to seek out expertise advice from the people that are creating the formula itself and simplify it so that we can all see how the formula works and that it is more transparent for folks. Continue the flexibility at a local level because every school district is going to be different. Their needs are going to be different. We're not a one-size-fits-all. We cannot do any more no more unfunded mandates. That just can't happen. It's important across the board that we're not going to be raising the taxes. Unfortunately, some things may have to be cut, but I look at that in a sense of if these are dual programs, then let's comb it back and see what is actually working in each community, what's going to work for them. Long-term plans, I think, are most important as well. If we create something to put out there, a program, we have to go back sometimes and fix it, well, that's inefficiency. So let's make long-term plans on this. You have to look at the budget similar to a house budget. They're going to have things to prioritize. Sometimes the means is going to be there and sometimes it's not. And at the end of the day, there's only so much money.
Thank you. Next will be our candidate from Senate District 46, Ron Latz.
You know, I find it somewhat distressing that some of the candidates here support increased funding in education, yet when it comes time to fund the state budget, they propose budgets, and I'm thinking particularly of the Republican House, proposing budgets that put intense downward pressure on state revenues and the ability to fund education at adequate levels. So I think you really need to see what they're doing in St. Paul, if they're incumbents, or what they're proposing to do, and where they're really willing to put their money where their mouth is. We have actually fallen in Minnesota in comparison to other states around the country from where we used to be in terms of our commitment to funding K-12 education. And I think you can't separate that out from the approach to the state budget. There's only so much efficiency you can get, and only so many program cuts you can sustain until you're really affecting quality. And the fact is, quality is affected most by the teacher in the classroom and the number of kids that teacher is teaching, and you can't change that without adequate funding to have the staff to do the teaching. I would add that, of course, we need to deal with the cross subsidies for special education. That's been an ongoing problem. And the federal level has to come up with their fair share. We should look at unfunded mandates and increase flexibility. And in particular, with regard to local revenues, I have long been a supporter of allowing referenda levies to be tied to inflation, so they're not a set dollar amount, but they can go up over the course of time, and to allow levies, frankly, by school boards to be done without referendum. Every other level of government has the authority to do that. But our school boards don't for some reason, and they ought to have that same authority. I served on a city council for 9 years. We raised our revenues as necessary, or we reduced our revenues as necessary, but we didn't have to have voter approval every time. We stand for re-election. That's the voter approval that's most important in a democracy.
Thank you. Next will be our candidate from House District 34B, Dennis Smith.
We need to adequately fund our schools. The key to maintaining the pace of funding is to make sure we not only put more money into education, but make sure we are funding our priorities. This past session, the GOP pushed to ensure the increase in funding went primarily to the formula. The governor's universal pre-K program is inspiring, but it would cost $350 million in annual spending on a whole new grade, while schools are asking for more money to fund the operations and academic programs of their current K through 12 grades. The funding needed to just pay the universal pre-K would be enough to fund a $350 per student increase in general education. We should not be focused on simply funding mandates, but also examining whether those mandates are worth funding. If the state is unwilling or unable to pay for a state mandate, then we should reassess whether that mandate is necessary. So in addition to ensuring we are adequately funding our schools, we need to give our schools the flexibility they need to spend the revenue they have on the programs that are best suited for their local needs. The state legislature should not be a de facto state board of education.
Thank you. Next will be our candidate from Senate District 34, Warren Limmer.
Thank you. You know, as I look at the question says, do you believe current funding levels are adequate or inadequate? And quite honestly, you can say yes and no, simply because of the unfairness of how we distribute those education fund dollars. We heard from other candidates that pointed out that Minnesota has passed one of the largest education funding bills in recent history. Today, we spend more money on education dollars than we ever had in state history. And yet, at the same time, why do we have complaints from Senate school districts that are saying they don't have enough adequate funding? I believe that the funding mechanism is unfair. I think the categorical aids that we have are oftentimes products of deal-making in the legislature. And as a result, it's not going to satisfy us in the long term. We need reform. One of the ideas that I thought is perhaps we should reinvent the tax system that encourages businesses to grow. And when businesses grow, wages go up, more jobs more people are employed, and more taxes come in due to the volume of new growth. And if the new growth continues to grow, we will have in volume the dollars we need to fund education. But we need reform in our entire tax system in order to do that. It is intertwined.
Thank you. Next will be our candidates from House District 33A, Jerry Hertas.
Well, thank you. Well, for the last 4 years, I've served on the K-12 Finance Committee at the legislature. And, you know, we're spending 41 cents out of every dollar of the general fund for K-12 and another 8 or 9 cents, almost 50%, for higher ed, and almost 50% of the entire state budget is spent on education. Now, I can assure you out of $17 billion that we're spending currently in the biennium, that no one is down at the legislature complaining that they have too much money. And they're not offering to give any back, that's certainly for sure. You know, sometimes in committee we have little discussions and spar a little bit, and I have a good friend and colleague on the other side of the aisle that often refers to our district out here as the district with silk stockings. And that shows really kind of a lack of understanding about our school districts out here in the district. In 33A, there's 8 school districts that we represent, and we have both the AMSD schools, the Association of Metro School Districts, and we have C schools, the Students for Equity in Education. And the inherent unfairness that goes between some of the school districts. We've got some districts in this legislative district that have budgets of over $200 million. And then we've got school districts that are just about $20 or $25 million. Some are even smaller than that. So we want every student to get an education no matter where they are by zip code in the state and get a good one. But the inherent unfairness, too many categorical buckets of spending, not enough local control. As we've heard, the legislature has become a state school board. We have all these unfunded mandates. We get the federal government. And some of the smaller districts with the cross subsidies have real problems in that they can't predict or know where some of these costs come. And essentially what happens is it can put some of these small districts into budget crisis that they did not plan for.
Thank you. All right, Noelle Thomas.
Thank you. As we've heard, the funding of education is probably the most important job of a legislator, and it's a serious job. We've heard that the formula is too complex and not transparent. It needs to be transparent. It needs to be simplified. Schools need predictability. They need to plan for future years. And as a legislature, we need to assist our schools. We need local control. You are the experts. We've heard St. Paul is not the expert. And yet it is the most important job that a legislature can do, is to use this tax money in ways that really impact the families, the students, and the schools. Schools play an important role, not just in terms of education. Schools are the fundamental elements of our community. They are important, and local control in terms of how to spend that money and what you need needs to have a champion. Thank you.
Thank you. Lastly, we have the candidates from Senate District 33, Sherry Pugh.
When you come at the end of a lot of people talking, there's not too much more you can say. So with that, I think what I'd like to say is, you know, education is part of what we are as a democracy. We're a country that's a democracy, and part of that, being in that democracy, demands that we provide education to all of our citizens. And in doing that, we shouldn't be afraid to spend too much money. We shouldn't be afraid to reach excellence. We shouldn't be afraid to have equity so that it won't matter if you're in North Minneapolis, Wayzata, or Wilmer, Minnesota, that there's equity so that all of our schools reach excellence. There was a time in this state back in the 70s when we said we had an education miracle, and we were so proud of what we were doing for education in this state. I think we've lost that value, that spirit, that commitment to reach that again. And, you know, part of the thing that disturbed me in part of the talks was, let's not say that special ed's a problem. Let's not say that pre-K is a problem. They are part of excellence in education. Excellence in education is what brings our community to a whole. Excellence in education is what makes us a family.
Thank you. Jay Nygaard.
Well, I must completely agree. After sitting at the end of this table, it's obvious I'm not the expert, and it's obvious we've got a lot of good solutions and a lot of problems identified here, which is probably the best thing out of being here. And what I chose to do while it was going on, I just quick little research, and you know, it goes along with how I believe as a libertarian about smaller government and such. And if we could release some of these regulations and encourage small businesses to grow and businesses to grow, we would create more money and more taxes, more pools to fund a lot of the things we're talking about. You know, a big issue too that I've heard, which I completely agree, is unfunded federal mandates, and it's just a chokehold on all our schools because of all these requirements that maybe some communities need and some don't. And you know, I'm a big states' rights guy, and I'm a big local rights guy, and we need to be able to figure out our perspective and what we need to do with our kids. And to me, that really shouldn't be a federal issue at all. Now, some of the statistics I did find was the U.S. spends over $15,000 a year per student when the world average is $9,300. I heard today that we're spending 50% of our money on our students. We spend 73% of our GDP compared to 6.3% the rest of the world. And also I found out that only 70 to 72% is paid by the government. The other 25% is paid by you and me for the public schools in fees and other things that are associated with it, you, me, and the corporation. So to me, the money's there. I just see that there's a big problem in how a lot of times it's used and abused. And I think we have to find a better way to use the money we have to our advantage.
Thank you, candidates. We will now move into the small group discussions. Please move into the designated classrooms as quickly as possible. LAC members will be in the hallways to guide you. The small group discussions will end at 8 o'clock, and we will not reconvene as a large group. So District 44 will be in room A111, and everybody else will be in room 201. So we will help you reach there. As a reminder to everyone, this will be broadcast on EdTV and uploaded to the Wayzata Public Schools website. So thank you once again for your participation.